Welcome, foolish mortals, to another movie review, and in this video I shall be your host as we review Disney's latest spooktacular, Haunted Mansion. Based on the theme park attraction and released in 2023, Disney's Haunted Mansion sees a single mum named Gabby hiring a tour guide, a psychic, a priest and a historian to help exorcise their newly bought mansion after discovering it is inhabited by ghosts. Directed by Justin Simien and written by Katie Dippold, the movie stars Lakeith Stanfield, Rosario Dawson, Owen Wilson, Tiffany Haddish, Danny DeVito, Jamie Lee Curtis, Chase Dillon and Jared Leto. Disney's The Haunted Mansion attraction has been around since 1969 and features in every single one of Disney's magical kingdoms across the world. It's popular and it's pretty well known, so of course with Disney making more movies based upon their different attractions, it made sense that one day they would get around to revisiting this one. We've previously had two different films based on this ride, with the first releasing in cinemas in 2003 starring Eddie Murphy, and the second one releasing as a Halloween special on Disney Plus featuring the Muppets. The Muppets Halloween special, I'll admit, was actually quite fun. It was really entertaining. It features a lot of fun little surprises and cameos. And while the 2003 movie is generally regarded in a negative light, I do have some pretty fond memories of it, and I did enjoy it a lot when I was a kid. I don't want to go too into detail about how it is that I feel about the 2003 movie, because I am planning on doing a rewind review for it one day in the future. I'm not entirely sure when I'll get around to doing it, but I am planning on doing it one day in the future, so keep an eye out for updates. But seeing as though that movie never managed to reach the same level as Pirates of the Caribbean, which is another movie series that is based on a theme park attraction, they've kind of held off on ever revisiting it. There had been rumblings of another Haunted Mansion movie being in development for a little while, the most prominent one being written and directed by Guillermo del Toro and starring Ryan Gosling as the Hatbox Ghost. And I'll be completely honest, I was sold on the idea of that based on that information alone. And unfortunately that movie never happened, but years later, 2023, we finally have this one. And I've got to be honest, when I started seeing the marketing for this movie, it did start getting my hopes up. It has a fantastic cast with some of my favourite actors involved, and on top of that it looked like they were actually embracing the horror elements. And when it was given a 12A certificate over here in the UK, I did really get quite excited about it, and I really liked the look of it. And then the reviews started coming out for it, which were pretty mixed overall, so my excitement definitely went down a little bit for this movie, but I was still curious in checking it out. And now that I have, I can say that overall it is okay, but it could have been more. The story for this adaptation sees Ben Mathias, played by Lakeith Stanfield, being sought out to help a mother and her son after they find themselves trapped in a haunted mansion. But when Ben finds himself trapped, he and the rest of the captives must find a way to break the curse on the mansion before they become ghosts themselves. In many ways, it is a pretty simple story in which the characters need something before time runs out, and that is mainly what the story does focus on. But it's balanced out with Ben's own story and struggles with grief, which is a large theme in this film, but it isn't properly explored. It's also a movie that does establish a lot of rules regarding what it is that the mansion can actually do, especially when it comes to actually preventing people from leaving and how it draws them back. But the way that the story plays out in this movie, it does break its own rules, because without spoiling what it is that happens, there is a sequence in this movie that requires the characters travel to another location to get something that they need. And they don't face any resistance or pullback to the mansion, like, at all. And having thought about it, there is a part of me that does think, why is it that the thing that they need needs to be in another location? Why can't it be within the mansion itself? To me, it would make a little bit more sense within the overall story, and it would help explain why there is so much supernatural activity within this one location. Outside of that, I think it is fine and has a good enough pace that manages to balance out the various elements introduced. There's twists and turns as the mystery surrounding the mansion deepens and more information is revealed. And while they do work within the story, I will admit I did find it pretty predictable and worked out pretty much all the big reveals fairly early on. It didn't really hinder my enjoyment of this movie overall. I did have fun with it, but as I said, I did find it very predictable. When it comes to the cast, there's some big names involved, like Danny DeVito, Owen Wilson, Rosario Dawson, Tiffany Haddish and Jamie Lee Curtis. But leading things is Lakeith Stanfield as Ben. He really surprised me, especially based on what we were seeing of him in the trailers. He is a genuinely great character with a decent backstory and some really good emotional moments and comedy that allows Lakeith to deliver a great and believable performance. I think it definitely helps that he gets a large amount of focus early on in the movie that establishes who he is and what his mindset is like. Most of the other characters don't really have that luxury, and a lot of their introductions to me feel a little bit rushed. The other standout for me is Chase Dillon as Travis, the young kid. He's really good too, and I did think he was a likeable character who also gets some deeper moments and comedy, and it does work really well. Some of the best character moments in this movie are the scenes between Ben and Travis. I think that they do work well together, and I do like the connection that they develop over the course of the movie. But when it comes to the other characters in this movie, I do think that there is a bit to be desired. I love Rosario Dawson, and it was great seeing her involved in this, and she does do the best that she can with what she's given, but she doesn't get as much focus as Ben or Travis. The rest of the ensemble is a pretty quirky bunch, with Tiffany Haddish playing a psychic called Harriet, Owen Wilson playing Father Kent, and Danny DeVito as Danny DeVito. He doesn't really have much to do in this. They do get a few fun moments here and there, and I do think that they do bounce off each other well enough, but when it comes to the overall involvement that they have in this movie, there isn't really enough for them to do. And that includes Jamie Lee Curtis in a small role as Madame Leota. I honestly thought, because Madame Leota is one of the few characters that I am fully aware of when it comes to Haunted Mansion, I thought that she was going to have a much bigger role in this film. She does have a few fun scenes here and there, but that's really it for her character, and I think that they really could have done a lot more with her. I do think that there is a really decent cast involved in this movie, and I do like who they have cast as each of these characters, but there's just not enough for them to do, especially since the movie is just under 2 hours and there's not enough time to explore them all. Jared Leto also has a part in this as the Hatbox Ghost, and I'll be honest, if I didn't know it beforehand, I wouldn't have known that he was even in this. And I don't think he's too bad in this one. He does look like he's having fun playing this role, he looks cool from his design and movements, and he sounds cool too, with a really big, deep, creepy voice that vibrates around the room. My biggest complaint with his character though is that he does feel very one-dimensional. I feel like they really could have done a lot more with him. He's only really in this to serve as an antagonist, and I think that that is a missed opportunity, because I feel like he could very easily tie into the theme that this movie is going for, and I feel like it would work really well. Or heck, I'd even replace Hatbox with the Bride and have her be the main antagonist. She could absolutely fit the theme of grief and provide enough spooks for her to actually be a threat. I know that that is not her backstory in this movie, but I do feel like that would work a lot better. I did like the Hatbox Ghost overall, but considering this is a character that is described as the ghost that haunts ghosts, I really feel like they could have done a lot more with him. But I will admit, as I said earlier, I do think that his design is really cool and it's really creepy as well, and that does extend to the other ghosts in this film as well. There's some really fun and imaginative creations in this one, and some that will definitely frighten younger viewers. I will admit, some of them did remind me of the ghosts from Ghostbusters 2016, with sort of blue mist-like forms and sometimes cartoonish features. And that isn't really a negative for me, because despite what I think about the movie overall, I do think that the designs of the ghosts are actually really good and one of the best parts of that film. And when it comes to this one, I do like how the ghosts do look in this movie, and I do think that there is a really good mix of both old and new creations. And when it comes to the costumes and the makeup that they've gone for with a lot of these characters, I do really like what it is that they have done, and it is really good, especially since it does add a lot more personality to some of these characters. The film takes place in modern day New Orleans, but the way that the characters do dress throughout the movie, it does give this a slightly more timeless feel, and it is really hard to kind of pinpoint when exactly this movie is supposed to be set, even though they do clearly say that it is supposed to be in modern day. And when it comes to the technology that's used throughout the movie, it very much is set in the modern day. I will admit, there is one bit of technology that they use throughout this movie to detect ghosts, and it does lead to some really clever visuals and some tense moments. Now, this being a Haunted Mansion movie, you would expect this movie to quite easily slot within the horror genre. And while there are some good horror visuals and style that they have used throughout this movie, especially early on in the film, I didn't really think it was really that scary. And I do need to clarify that I wasn't going into this movie expecting it to be this really scary horror movie, but I was expecting it to be a lot more intense than it was and have some proper jump scares. Well, there are a few jumps here and there, but I'll be honest, they didn't really faze me and honestly felt quite predictable. It is a movie that does have a spooky vibe to it and some creepy visuals that younger kids will probably find scary, but it is relatively tame overall. And I can't help but think that they could have have pushed it a bit further and given this movie a bit more of an edge. In all honesty, to me it felt like a Halloween special that you would see on TV or even Disney Plus. And part of me reckons that the reason why this movie is releasing in August 2023 rather than October is because I think that they want it to be available on Disney Plus for October. I'm calling it now. I think that this movie is going to be available on Disney Plus in October. Look, I know that this movie is aimed more towards families, and that is more than fair. But I do think that they could have pushed it just a little bit further, especially with the age rating that this movie has. Over here in the UK it's rated a 12A, and over in the US it's rated a PG-13, so there is enough leeway there to do something a little bit spookier and a little bit more intense. Case in point, the Woman in Black movie adaptation was absolutely terrifying, and when that released in cinemas, that was a 12A. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was a 12A, and that was pretty intense and graphic for a Disney film. And when it comes to the original Haunted Mansion movie from 2003, that film was a PG, a whole rating lower than this one. And I'll be honest, that one did scare me as a kid because it felt more real and had some genuinely good jump scares that were much harder to predict. This one's a 12. Go for it. Anyway, all that aside, there is actually quite a bit of levity and comedy injected into this. And I know that the idea of that might scare a few people, but I will say that how the comedy is used in this, I do think is used really well. I do think that it is used within reason. It's kind of sprinkled throughout the movie rather than just primarily focusing on these big jokes. The setups themselves are okay and they do feel very within character, but I will admit that the comedy overall is a little bit hit and miss. But this movie isn't meant to be hilarious, it isn't meant to be a comedy, and I do appreciate that they do focus much more on the spookier stuff. There's also a good amount of practical and CG effects throughout, and there's a fair amount of more practical stuff than you'd think. But for the most part, this is a film that is quite reliant on CG effects. Some of it looks okay, others not so much. The Hatbox Ghost is actually a prime example of this because he doesn't look too bad for most of his scenes, but he can still look quite rubber-faced whenever his head is out of the box. And I also think that whenever it is that they start using green screen throughout a few of these sequences, I do think that it is pretty noticeable overall. Now, that's not to say that there aren't any good visuals, because there's some great imagery in this, and it does capture the horror vibe with lots of shadows and candlelights. Plus, when we get a glimpse of the ghost realm, it does become quite trippy, and the set pieces can become quite imaginative. There is definitely a sprinkle of Doctor Strange used in this movie with some of the visual designs whenever they are in the ghost realm, but I do think that it does work quite well within this movie, and it does lead to some of the most creative visuals of the entire film. The most disappointing part of that for me is that they don't do enough of it. There are some really fun ideas and characters introduced in this movie, and I really think that they could have done some really awesome stuff with them. Now, when it comes to the Haunted Mansion ride, I haven't actually been on it myself, so I don't recognise a lot of the Easter eggs or references that do appear in this movie. That said, I have seen a few videos. I have seen the 2003 movie, as I said, and the Muppets movie, plus I have played Disney Magic Kingdom, so I do recognise a few things here and there, and I do understand a few nods and callbacks. So it is really cool to see that they do include a lot of that stuff in this, and I do feel like if you are somebody who has been on the ride, I think that there is going to be a lot more that you will recognise. And when it comes to the music for this movie, we have Chris Bowers creating actually a pretty good score. There is a really good mixture of different flavours that are added into this soundtrack overall, with more sort of classical orchestral themes that you'd normally hear in a traditional Disney movie mixed with more modern horror movie themes. Plus there's a good amount of jazz that's injected into this as well, which does fit the New Orleans setting. I did like it overall, and I do like how it is that the Grim Grinning Ghosts theme is actually woven into this soundtrack in a pretty nice way. But I will admit, outside of a few tracks here and there, I don't think that it's the most memorable soundtrack. That being said, I do think that it is good overall, and it does fit the overall tone and atmosphere. Overall, this is a fun, family-friendly movie with a great cast, some creative ideas, and a spookiness you rarely see in a modern Disney movie. I like the music, and the effects were mostly okay, and while some of them felt a little bit underdeveloped, the characters are likeable enough. That said, there is a lot of missed opportunities. It is pretty predictable, there's elements that could have worked better if they were changed, plus while it does partially maintain a spooky tone, I really think that they could have pushed the fear factor a bit further to earn that age certificate. I did enjoy this one overall, but it's not one that I feel like I need to revisit. I would recommend checking this out if it does look appealing to you, but I don't think that this is a must-watch movie. So with all that being said, my rating for Disney's Haunted Mansion is 6 out of 10. It's not perfect, but I do think that families will enjoy this one. Plus, if you're looking for something spooky to watch with the kids over the Halloween season, as long as they can handle it, I think this one's a good shout. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so thank you very much for watching this video. If you do enjoy this content, please like and subscribe, plus hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that is going on here. If you have seen Disney's Haunted Mansion, let me know down in the comments what you think about it and how you would compare it to the original film. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like to see me do, let me know down below. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.